In the small American town of Druzhnoselye, located in New York State, another unfortunate incident. One of the patients, Michael Johnson, managed to escape from the local psychiatric hospital. Michael was a 35-year-old man who suffered from schizophrenia. He had been receiving compulsory treatment at the hospital for several years, but his condition had worsened recently. Doctors feared that he might attempt to escape. On the day of his escape, Michael managed to leave his room and the hospital ground. The staff realized his absence only a few hours later when they came to collect him for lunch. Immediately, a search began for Michael. Police and volunteers searched the area around the hospital, but were unable to find him. Meanwhile, Michael returned home to his mother's house, which was located near the hospital. His mother was shocked to see him, but allowed him inside the house. When Michael returned home, he seemed confused and distressed at first. His mother, Mary, tried to comfort him and give him some medicine she kept in her medicine cabinet. However, it soon became apparent that Michael's condition was getting worse. His speech became more and more vague and frightening. During the night, Mary heard strange sounds in the house. She thought someone was sneaking around and whispering in the hallway. When she went to investigate, she found Michael in the lobby in front of a mirror. He was staring at his reflection, his eyes empty and glassy. His face was contorted in a frightening grimace. "Michael, are you okay?" Mary asked, approaching him. Michael didn't respond. He continued to stare at the mirror, and suddenly his face transformed into a terrifying mask of anger. He started muttering unintelligible words and moving faster and faster, as if someone was controlling his movements. Realizing her son was in danger, Mary attempted to call the police. The phone was not working. Terrified, she fled to the basement where she kept old items and several extra phones. In the basement, she discovered an old radio. She turned it on and heard a faint crackle, followed by a barely audible message for assistance. Mary attempted to respond, but the signal was weak and intermittent. She knew she needed to act swiftly. Mary, fighting panic, tried to tune the radio to get a clear signal. But every time she thought she had made contact, the voice on the other end would become unintelligible again. Due to her constant fear, she quickly noticed that although Michael was not around, he continued to make terrible sounds that came from below. When she returned to the basement, she noticed some of the old objects moving strangely on their own. The shelves with the boxes began to sway slowly, as if someone invisible was pushing them. The sharp and cracking noises sounded like someone was knocking on the walls outside. Mary went back to the radio and at some point heard a clear and alarming signal that seemed to be a request for help. She tried to respond, but felt the radio become warm and suddenly emit a deafening noise. The whole room filled with a strange hum as if she were in the center of a huge machine. The sounds faded away and the basement fell silent again. At that point, Mary felt a sense of something large and heavy slowly approaching her. Her heart beat in her temples, and she turned to see Michael, still distorted and furious, standing on the stairs leading to the basement. He didn't look human. His face appeared on the verge of collapse, and his movements were unnatural and abrupt. With each step, Michael became less recognizable, and his eyes gleamed with an eerie light. Mary, desperate to find a way out, noticed that the basement door had closed again, as if someone had locked it from the inside. She glanced around, searching for a way to escape. That moment, the radio went silent, leaving her alone with the terror that was slowly advancing. Michael approached, and there was nothing human about him anymore, only cold, unhuman energy. Mary tried to pick the lock on the basement door, but her hands were shaking, and her steps were becoming more chaotic with every second. Mary, with her heart pounding in her chest, did her best to open the door, but each attempt she made seemed doomed to fail. The lock was stuck, and her fingers sliding over the cold metal could not find the right position. Michael, coming closer and closer, started saying something unintelligible. His words, like plaintive moans, interrupted with increasing intensity. He had no weapon in hand, but seemed filled with an unimaginable rage that emanated from him. He seemed not to be in control of himself, driven by some obscure force. Mary, feeling her strength draining, jumped on a chair in an attempt to break down the door. However, it did not work either. In desperation, she ran around the basement searching for anything that could help. In the mess, she found an old skeleton key hidden in a corner. She grabbed it and ran back to the door, only to realize that the key did not fit. Meanwhile, Michael stood at the top of the stairs, his face twisted in a grimace. His eyes flickered in time with the eerie sound emanating from the radio, which grew louder with each passing second. Michael became increasingly agitated, as if something evil was trying to take control of him. Mary, in desperation, rushed around the basement, trying to find a way out. Ominous sounds haunted her at every turn, and she felt the pressure in her chest only intensify. She looked at Michael, still standing by the stairs, and noticed his face begin to transform, becoming increasingly creepy and inhuman. He no longer appeared to be a scared, sick person. Instead, his expression displayed unimaginable horror and anger. Suddenly, the radio began working again, making not just a crackling sound, but a distorted and harsh one that overlapped other noises. Through this sound, Mary heard words that sounded like incantations from an ancient language. Her mind struggled to make sense of the absurdity, but fear and tension made it difficult to perceive anything clearly. Michael, as if energized by these sounds, began to move at an unnatural speed. His arms and legs moved like those of a puppet, controlled by invisible strings. He approached Mary, who, after trying to open the door one last time with an old key, screamed for help in desperation. There was a terrifying fear in her voice, which echoed through the basement. She looked around, and her eyes fell on the crates and containers scattered throughout the basement. Inside one of them, she found an old, rusty, and dusty chainsaw. With trembling hands, she picked it up and, despite the noise and terror, began to use it to saw through the door. The saw's rough sound mixed with Michael's incoherent howls, as if he was struggling with some internal force that demanded a sacrifice. Suddenly, as the door began to slowly open, Michael jumped up and ran towards Mary. She managed to escape past him, climbing onto the stairs and running into the house. However, when she looked back, she saw that the basement was filled with a strange, dark liquid that was quickly spreading through the space. It was thick and viscous, like resin, and as it spread, distorted figures and faces began to emerge from it, their expressions terrifying. In a panic, Mary ran out of the house and called the police. Law enforcement soon arrived at the scene, finding Mary's home in disarray. They searched the basement but found no liquid or sign of Michael. Instead, they discovered an old radio that was making mysterious, distorted noises. Mary, frightened and exhausted, was taken to the hospital for evaluation. Her condition was deemed extremely unstable, and although she attempted to describe what happened, her account was so bizarre and confusing that some doubted its authenticity. Over the next few weeks, rumors started to spread about Mary's house being haunted. People said that the noises and screams from the basement could still be heard, especially on rainy days. Some neighbors claimed that they saw strange lights and shadows through the windows of the abandoned house. Michael Johnson has still not been found. The search for him continues, but there is no new information about his whereabouts. His disappearance remains one of the strangest and most mysterious cases in the area, Druzhnoselye.